some of you know, over the last few years, part of my work has been to talk about the inner worlds, to try to reclaim our spiritual relationship to the inner worlds that traditionally were very much part of humanity's spiritual heritage. And one of the sadnesses I feel is how much contemporary spirituality belongs to what I call the flat earth society, in that it seems to only to see spirituality within almost a single plane of reality, while our heritage, our spiritual heritage, whether you're in a shamanic tradition or a Tibetan Buddhist tradition or a Sufi tradition, has always understood and worked with many different planes of reality, many different worlds. And so I want to expand that today. The actual inspiration for today's talk came from a dream somebody shared a while ago, which was a dream that showed a magical dimension to their own self, to their own way of being that they didn't know, they didn't recognize. So I thought to give a talk about miracles and magic and the difference between the two. And just to give a little background, I was brought up in a very traditional English middle-class background, sent off to boarding school at the age of 7. And although the Hogwarts in Harry Potter was modeled after the boarding schools that I attended, there was a certain element that was lacking. We certainly had sports, we definitely didn't have magic. And it was a very two-dimensional world. And then, when I was 19, I met my teacher, Irina Tweedy, and sat in her little room beside the train tracks in North London and entered a world that was full of the miraculous and full of magic. And over the years that passed, I became very familiar with the miraculous, because it was around us, because it was part of the air, part of the aura, part of the energy field in which she lived and which we could breathe also. And it just became, the miraculous just became part of an understanding of spiritual life. And it was many years later that I realized that for many people that is quite foreign. The miraculous is something other. And yet, for many centuries, in a way, it is really part of life. It has been part of humanity's life. And I thought to try and explain how miracles work a little bit and how they are different to magic, and yet both belong to this understanding of humanity as, say, belonging to a multi-dimensional reality, which for some very strange reason we have forgotten. A few months ago I was walking on the beach near where I live. It was one of those very beautiful early spring mornings in California when the sun is out and it's very warm. And suddenly I found myself taken to the inner worlds. Just in a moment, I was just walking along the beach and suddenly I was present in the inner worlds with the beings of the inner worlds, and they were very confused. And they said to me, they were just confused. They said it's not supposed to be like this, and they didn't understand what human beings were doing. And they said at this time, at this moment in our collective evolution, because we all share the same world or worlds, and our evolution is very linked together. They said to me, at this time in our evolutions, we're all supposed to be working together. And humanity is supposed to be working together with the inner worlds. And they really didn't understand why this wasn't happening. Why humanity had isolated itself in this very two-dimensional world. And they were confused. They said, it's not supposed to be like this. A miracle, by its very nature, is the direct intercession of a higher plane of reality into this world. It's very, very simple. There is no effort involved. It just happens that some energy, some presence, often an angelic presence, interacts directly with this world. As I say, there is no effort, there is no manipulation. One can pray for a miracle, and often prayers can be answered by a miracle. I just give you a little example of an email I got from a friend just a week ago. My mum and myself, we are very grateful to be in your prayers. The day my mum was going to go through a second operation, doctors observed a considerable healing in my mum's situation and gave up on operation. I am endlessly thankful to God for this incredible blessing. That is a miracle. Intercession was given. Healing was given. Most of our understanding of miracles usually has to do with physical healing. Of course, there are many different types of miracles, as I will explain a little bit, but it just happens. And it usually happens through the angelic plane, through the angels. There are angels of healing. That is their work, that is how they are trained. They are trained to help humanity by healing. And it happens much more often than you think. Often people don't notice, or they're not aware that it's a miracle. But sometimes one sees very clearly that is a miracle. It's to say you can pray to the angels. They like to be prayed to. They're here to help us. They're very beautiful. There are angels of power and angels of beauty. So the angelic world is much closer than we think. They like to be related to. And then they can intercede if it is the will of God, or if it is the will of God. So it's very simple. A miracle by its very nature is very simple. It's the direct intercession of a higher plane of reality into this world. The higher planes follow different laws. They are allowed, if it is the will of God, to change things in this world that couldn't otherwise be changed. And as I say, they don't work according to the laws of this world, so there is no effort involved. If you want to change something in this world, you have to make an effort. If you want to grow things in your garden, you have to dig up the soil. Miracles are effortless. That's their nature, because, as I say, they come from the higher plane, the plane of the soul, or beyond, the angelic plane, that comes directly down through the planes of manifestation. They sometimes into the physical world. And the most obvious examples are physical healing. That's when people say, it's a miracle. We had another example recently in our group. Somebody's friend's 26-year-old daughter fell from the 8th floor of a building, from the balcony on the 8th floor of a building. And she was in a coma for, I think, a couple of months. And when she came out of the coma, the only damage was some broken teeth from an 8th floor fall. And she actually, when she came out, she remembered white-clad figures being around her when she was on the other side. The angels, or those beings who look after us, they were around her. So she was given a certain healing, so she could be given a second chance to continue her life, to learn something more, to go deeper within herself. Maybe a certain darkness that had surrounded her life until this moment had been removed through those beings who work to help humanity. We are not alone. There are many beings around us. They're already present in this room, because they like to be related to. And so they come, they listen. There's like an angelic ear already listening. Oh, this old Sufi, what is he talking about? It's nice he knows we're around, you know? They are present. But it's not just about healing. I shared within our group a while ago a lovely little story. Again, it just happened a couple of months ago. A young woman, not young, middle-aged woman, came to our group really with a singing heart, and she was a dentist in East Germany. And, you know, I said, well, how did you find us? And she said, well, it was very interesting. I was going through a very difficult time, almost impossible time. So I Googled, okay? And I Googled despair, loneliness, spirituality. And Google answered with Mrs. Tweedy. And so I read her book. It touched my heart. I found the way to your group, and my heart has been singing ever since. Unbelievably grateful. But she said it was interesting because the next time I Googled despair, loneliness, spirituality, a whole lot of completely other answers came up. Mrs. Tweedy was nowhere to be found. So we happened to have in our group a Google employee. So I asked Ben, I said, you know, what about the angel in Google? And he says, that's a kind of secret we never mention to the public. But it was a different kind of miracle, and there are angels in Google. That when the heart is crying, when there is deep longing and deep need within the human being, an answer can be given, a direction can be given. That, well, it's a bit like in a different way my teacher, how she met her teacher in India was that she was in Kashmir, in Srinagar, and she met a French woman called Lillian, and just for no particular reason, she went to visit her, and while she was there, staying in this little remote cottage outside of Srinagar, in the rice paddies, the rice fields, Lillian had a letter delivered that said, you have with you a Russian woman who has me in her heart of hearts. And Mrs. Tweedy was astounded because nobody knew she was going to be there. She hadn't even planned to go there, except a couple of days before, and it took 5 days for a letter to get from Kanpur to Srinagar. So those are the miracles of the heart. You see, there are physical miracles, and when we think of miracles, we think like this young woman who fell from 8 stories and is okay. Or somebody whose cancer just goes. Or somebody in our group I grew up with who the doctors said you will never have children because he had leukemia when he was young and they gave him so much radiation. And Mrs. Tweedy said, I don't believe in it. And he has 2 beautiful twins who are in their 20s now. Those are the physical miracles. They're the most tangible miracles. And they are really part of life. And once you enter into that mysterious dimension of your own spiritual nature, you enter into the field of miracles. Of course, miracles can happen to anybody. But as I say, I grew up in an environment in which miracles just happened. And then there are the spiritual miracles which are less spoken about, but in a way, for me, the greatest miracle is what is called the turning of the heart. There is a great, great Sufi, Rabia. She was born into slavery until her master noticed she prayed all the time and he set her free. And somebody asked her and they said, if I turn towards God, and will God turn towards me? And she said, no, never. First God has to look at you, then you look at God. And the Sufis call this moment the turning of the heart. And to me that is the greatest miracle, because suddenly out of this 3-dimensional world You awaken inexplicably into a multidimensional reality, into divine love within your heart, into all of the secrets that belong to our human nature. When a light in the eyes changed, and I've seen it happen to people, that is why it is said of the prophet loved perfume and beautiful women and the shining of eyes in prayer. Because when God has touched the heart of a human being with that divine light, with that softness, with that touch, then something wakes up in the human being. The light in the eyes changes. And that to me is the greatest miracle, that you wake up to your divine nature, because all the effort in the world, you can't get there. All the practices, all the austerities, you can fast for months in a cave, and you can't get there. But then an angel of love, a friend of God, somewhere, somebody from somewhere, looks into your heart and touches it with divine love, and then your whole life changes. And for many of you, you know that, you've experienced it. It can be in a moment of darkest despair, when everything is impossible, when life has no meaning, when there is just difficulties in front of you, and suddenly everything changes inexplicably. It can be the moment you meet your teacher. This is the miracle, the real miracle that is the grounding of spiritual life. And it is a gift. Always it is a gift. That moment when divine love touches your heart. So to me, in a way, yes, there are these physical miracles, and there is, of course, the Google miracles, but there is this deeper underlying mystical miracle of that moment when your heart is awakened and this song of divine love starts to sing within your heart, and you don't know where it came from, and you don't know where it will take you. It is the most beautiful thing that can happen to a human being. And if you've been given that gift, treasure it. It is inexplicable. It is a gift. As I say, it is given by the angels of love, or those who work for the love that belongs to God. It is given. Somebody looks into your heart, and if you are lucky, writes the name of God on the back of your heart. So those are miracles. They belong to our spiritual heritage, and they are the direct intercession from an inner plane, from a higher plane, into this world. And they happen through the will of God. Very simple, very beautiful, very powerful. Magic is different. Magic exists, it is real. We don't have much understanding of it in this culture. When we think of magic or magicians, we think of people who make tricks on TV in front of audiences. That is not magic. I also grew up in a magical world after I'd left a non-magical Hogwarts. Mrs. Tweedy used to describe herself as an old druid, and druids had this natural magic. And, for example, rainbows loved her. And whenever there was an important moment, a rainbow would be there. I remember that one summer afternoon in 87, just before we all came to America, a whole group of us came to America in the June of 87, there was this upside-down rainbow like a smile that sat over her house the whole afternoon. I'm sure there is some meteorological reason, but it was just like a smile, upside down, just sat over right above her house. And there is this magic, kind of magic is real, actually. Those of the present Karmapa, the Buddhist teacher, his previous incarnation, the Karmapa before him, was very, very magical. And a friend of mine who knew him said he used to actually to make rainbows when he was bored. He'd stand on the deck of his house and make rainbows. This is natural magic. It's the hidden dimension of life. Life is supposed to be magical. It's not supposed to be this boring effort and all of that. It has a magical dimension. Sadly, we've lost contact with it. We're no longer taught about magic, and it is like we all long to get to platform 9 3/4 to take the train to Hogwarts, but we can't find it anymore. Only in a book, only in a novel. And I think that's one of the reasons that Harry Potter touched so many people, because there is this longing for magic. In fact, there is this nice line by the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, who says, "You know what the issue is with this world? Everyone wants a magical solution to their problem, and everyone refuses to believe in magic." And why should one refuse to believe in magic? Magic has always been there. Again, it's part of our human heritage. And there are many, of course, different levels of magic, many different types of magic. I just want to open the doorway a little bit, because magic is working with the inner dimensions. It is, as I say, a miracle is just given. Magic is consciously or working with the inner dimensions. There are rules to magic, there are laws of magic, there is, of course, misuse of magic. But we human beings are magical beings. One of the unique qualities of a human being is it can work on different levels of reality. Animals belong to the physical world. Angels belong to the world of light. Elemental beings, they belong in their world. A human being, unique among all of creation as far as I can experience, we can go from level to level, and we can learn how to work with one level and to intercede in another level. And that belongs to magic. Now I give you a simple example. We have this kind of image of the magician, the guy in the gown, and he draws a pentagon on the floor, a 5-pointed star on the floor, and he makes a magical spell, and something happens. Okay, that is a caricature. But I give you another similar description of magic, which really belongs to the esoteric science, which is in Chartres Cathedral, there is a maze. It's a bit like the maze here, but it's a bit different, because it was made in a very, very particular way. And I happen to know this because when I was 19, I went there for 2 weeks, and I spent 2 weeks measuring the maze in Chartres Cathedral. And we wrote a little paper about it. And the maze in Chartres Cathedral is designed according to a 13-pointed star. It's not well known, but it's a 13-pointed star, which is the esoteric number of Christ and his disciples, 12 disciples and Christ. It's a very, very powerful number. Now, when you walk through the maze in Chartres Cathedral, you come from the west door and you walk in, and there, quite soon, there is the maze. It's often covered with chairs, but you walk, and when you circulate the maze, you actually symbolically go through all the different planetary cycles, all the different planets. And you are walking within a 13-pointed star. And its magical property is that it aligns you with your own soul. And there used to be actually in the middle of the maze, there used actually to be a minotaur engraved in metal. At the time of Napoleon, they took the metal out to make cannonballs, so it's not there. But in the very center of the maze, you faced your own demon, your minotaur. And then you turned when you'd faced it, and then in front of you was the incredibly beautiful rose window that is, of course, a mirror of the heart chakra that was directly reflected into your heart. And what the maze did, working with a 13-pointed star, it aligned you with the Christ principle within yourself, with the energies from above and the energies from below. Now that is a very high form of magic. And it meant that anybody who had the right attitude of prayer and devotion, who went into the maze, I say you went through each of the cycles of the planet, each of that dimension of your own psyche, and you got to the center. And it is working. Why is this working with the inner worlds? Because there is a plane between this physical world and the plane of the soul or the plane of the self that is the symbolic world. And the energy comes through that plane, it comes through this world of symbols, and one dimension of that, one way of being with that, is through geometric patterns, which is why sacred geometry or mandalas or five-pointed stars, or in this case, very, very unusual, a 13-pointed star, is a way of channeling the energies from the inner world so it has a particular spiritual, psychological effect. So this is magic. It's a very high form of magic, but it is working consciously. It was designed for a particular effect on the person walking in the maze. It's a very beautiful form of magic that is designed spiritually. We don't understand it now. We've lost the knowledge. Nobody knows how to do it. Those schools of magic, those esoteric schools, were closed down and they were lost. But that is an example of how magic can work. It can channel through the 13-pointed star. It can channel the energies from above with the earth energies from below to change something within the human being, to align something within the human being. And it is important to realize that this is actually in this in-between world that magicians and magic work most often. And there are many different forms of magic. You can learn to sing in a way that touches the soul. You can sing in a way that makes things happen. This was again it was taught. People were taught to sing these ancient songs that aligned a human being in a certain way, that opened the human being to the mystery that is around them, that is within them. And of course it can be misused. There is actually a very subtle misuse of this magic that's sadly taken place in the last decade. It's called the laws of attraction, which is a manipulation of the inner worlds. You imagine something in the inner worlds and you manipulate them to get what you want. This is a misuse of magic. It actually has a very negative effect. And one of the great sadnesses I find is that it has been promoted and popularized, and people do it without any understanding of what they are doing. You have to be very careful with magic. You have to have a pure intention. There is white magic, which is magic to help people. It can just help people. It can help the crops to grow. In Findhorn in Scotland, they had this magical relationship with the devas, and they grew these amazing vegetables in this very desolate land at Findhorn. That's a different form of magic. It's again working with the energies of the inner world, in this case the nature devas or the nature spirits. It's part of our heritage. There is helpful magic, and then there is white magic, and many different forms of white magic. And then there is grey magic where you use it for yourself, like in the laws of attraction. You've got to be very, very careful, because we don't understand the magical world. And you don't really want to buy a used car and go on a long road trip from a shady character. You can get stuck in the desert. But we're very naive, so we just would go along with it. And then there is black magic, where you actually use magic for a negative effect on other people. One of the very first books I ever wrote was a little book called The Story of Moshe Kogasa. And it's a very ancient Persian story. It's actually as well known in Persia as Cinderella is here in the West. And it's a story about how to use magic and the right attitude you should have towards magic. And there's a woodcutter who's very poor, and he's given these magical stones. And the whole story is about how you should use that quality of magic, how you should not, because he misuses them and he gets into a lot of trouble. Moshe Kogasa actually means the remover of obstacles. And it has a particular relevance for the spiritual path to which I belong, the Naqshbandis, because the founder of our order was was called the Moshe Kogasa of the people of love, because he removed the obstacles in people's hearts. You can do that. Yes, it's spiritual magic. If there's a block in somebody's heart, if they're a bit angry where they shouldn't be, or the stuff that you can breathe on it, you can blow on it, you can give a little bit of love and take it away. So the person is freer to experience divine love, so the love can work more easily within them. And as I say, magic, unlike a miracle, magic is conscious. You use it. You can make people sing again. There are many, many different forms of magic. I give you a little example from my own experience, which happened many, many years ago. I used to travel a lot. I don't do that so much anymore, and I used to stay in people's houses. And one place I was staying, and I had to give a big seminar the next day, and I just couldn't go to sleep. There was so much stuff in the room. And I suddenly realized this was where somebody was having a meditation group, and it was bringing up a lot of things in people. You know? Bringing up a lot of inner stuff in people. You've heard of that? But it wasn't being digested. It was just being left around. And it was sitting there in the corners of the room. All of this stuff, all of little bits of anger that somebody had come up, or resentment, or a mother problem, and it was all just sitting there like garbage in the room. And I didn't know what to do, because I couldn't go to sleep. It's like, sitting in somebody's toilet, psychic toilet. And so I asked. I said, somewhere in the inner world, you have to help me. And within a couple of minutes, I noticed little bits of white light, little sparks of light going round the room, clearing it up. They were little elemental light beings that were digesting all the garbage. And then within 10 minutes, the room was clean and I could go to sleep. So it was a conscious, I wanted something, I directed my attention, and there was a response from the inner world. Because the inner world's there to help us. We are supposed to be part of this multidimensional reality. And these little elemental beings, there are little elemental beings. They're not all good, the elemental beings, but there are elemental beings that are here to help humanity. And they came and they were very, very good at clearing up psychic garbage. So that's just an example from my own experience, of working with the inner worlds it's not a dramatic way, it wasn't a life-changing way. It is like, for example, if you lose something, I don't know if you know that there are little beings who can help you to find them. There are actually two sorts of little beings. And Mrs. Tweedy used to tell us this, she said there are some little beings that actually take things from here to there. They like shiny stones, a bit like jackdaws. And maybe you have a little ring that's lying around and they like it. And it's suddenly not there anymore because they have taken it. There used to be a children's story when I grew up called Borrowers. And they were the same. They were little beings who took things from our world into their world because they made houses out of them. But, there are these little beings in the inner world who like things here, and they take them into the inner world. Suddenly they're gone. But there are also little beings that like to help. And if you've lost something, have you ever had the experience you've lost something and you hunt everywhere for it, and then suddenly it's right in front of you? There it goes. It wasn't there before. Somebody just put it there to help you. It's magic. It's not big dramatic magic. It's not casting spells. It's friendly magic. It's life-helping magic. It's the life-sustaining magic. There's a little passage in Mrs. Tweedy's book where the teacher had to go out at night and drive, and they didn't have any gas for the car. And there wasn't a petrol station opened, and he said to everybody in the car, "Don't say anything, I have to keep focused." And the car got home without any gas. One of the things to understand is this: we have been taught, we have been taught a pack of lies about this world by a group of scientists who want to control it and control us. This world is not as fixed and as static as we have been led to believe. It's much more fluid. I often give this example because I was taught a lot about the inner worlds and a lot about the magical dimension of the inner worlds by the inhabitants of the inner worlds themselves. And when I was in my early 30s, they took me into the inner worlds. I would go there for an hour a day. And they explained how the inner worlds work and the magical dimension of the inner worlds and what you can do. And one of the things that I call him the Lord of Time explained to me is time is not the way you've been told it is. Time is not fixed. It is not just, it's not like this river that passes by, never to return. Said this is an imposition on time. This is the rational mind fixating on time. Time, he said, is much more fluid. You can change time. You can move time. And there's a very simple example of that. You can go into meditation, and you can still the mind, and you can have so many experiences in 5 minutes. You can be in completely other worlds. All sorts of things can happen to you, and you come out, so just 10 minutes has passed. Or you can sit. You ever had that time when you sit and you wait for time to pass and it goes so slowly? Time is not fixed. You can make time move. This is actually the Mad Hatter. Remember I told you about the Mad Hatter at the beginning? Because the Mad Hatter had a particularly difficult relationship with time. Because he made the great mistake of saying he was going to kill time. And as a result, time stopped. And it was the Mad Hatter's tea party, so it was always 4 o'clock. So he never got a chance to wash the dishes. So he moved from place to place around the table. Now you may think that's just a silly story, but it's not, because one can have a magical relationship to time. You can slow time down. You can step outside of time and do all sorts of things and come back into time. You never have to be late for appointments. You get time to work in your favor. This is simple magic. It's not difficult. It's just learning how the worlds work together. We don't have to live in the flat earth society. We're not meant to live in the flat earth. We have been imprisoned in the flat earth society. But life is magical. Life is meant to be magical. Life is meant to function on a multi-dimensional level. Now, my greatest sadness actually has to do with these are like little things to do with magic. And yes, they can be helpful, or some people can use magic and cast spells on people and all sorts of things. But my greatest sadness has to do with the lack of earth magic that we have in our culture. And this has to do with the whole nature of creation. Creation itself is built layer upon layer, out of nothingness, out of love, out of the archetypal world, layer upon layer. And there are beings who live in all of these different planes, just like in the plane of light there are angels. In the physical world there are elemental beings, there are nature spirits. There are many, many different layers. And creation is structured like multifaceted, multi-layered. And that's how it's meant to function. It's meant to function as a living, magical creation, because it's made by God. Very simple. God is magical, mysterious, wonderful. And creation is an expression of it. And we've been told it's not. And we've been told it's physical matter. And for some inexplicable reason, and I don't understand it, we have believed it. It's one of the greatest lies ever perpetrated on humanity. That we believe this is all there is. Which is extraordinary. Because, it's like the child who says to its newborn sibling, "You must remind me, I'm beginning to forget." It's not meant to be like this. It isn't like this, but we've been conned, we've been lied to century after century. I think, particularly in the West, of course, the Native American people still hold that magical understanding. In England, it started to go around the 17th century. And this has to do with earth magic, because it has to do with our relationship to creation and our relationship to the forces within creation, and why we have got to this place we are now of ecocide, of call it what you will. They call it politely climate change. I think it's a very polite word for what we've done. I give you a simple example which has to do with the healing powers and poison within certain plants. How did humanity discover which herbs had what healing property? And how did they know what amount became poisonous? Now, the rational flat earth scientists would tell you through trial and error. One day somebody had a particular illness and they put a particular plant in their mouth and they got better. And somebody else took too much of it and they died. Please. What do they take us for? It's very simple that there were people who were trained to talk to plants. And there were plants who talked to people. And the shaman went into a trance and the spirit in the plant spoke to him. And the spirit in the plant told him what its healing properties were, how to use it. As simple as that. There's a very beautiful book called Original Wisdom that describes one of the last tribes, I think in Malaysia, that works in this way, that has this understanding, that has this wisdom. It breaks my heart when we've cut off our connection to the world, to life, how the magic has then receded. There is this tradition in the Quran that says God taught Adam the names. It's one of those simple little sentences, and God taught Adam the names. That within that there is a whole tradition, a whole wisdom, that humanity, Adam is like the primal human being, was taught the names of creation. And if you understand something's name, esoterically, magically, you know its properties. It's why naming is so important, which we've, of course, completely lost. We've lost the wisdom of naming. We've lost the knowledge of naming. But you see its echoes in fairy stories like in Rumpelstiltskin, where the name is not told because the name holds the power, spinning straw into gold. And Rumpelstiltskin, the spirit from the inner world, and the whole power of names, which we knew. Humanity was given that knowledge. It's what separates humanity from the rest of creation, one of the things. We were given a certain knowledge. We were given the understanding of this magical relationship with creation. It's our heritage. It's what all of the earth-based spirituality has always been about. Yes, the transcendent spirituality, for example, Christian spirituality, can give us a relationship to the angelic worlds. Beautiful. This is Jacob's vision of the angels ascending and descending. The world of light. You go into the soul, you go into the world of light, and you have this relationship with the angelic worlds. But the earth-based indigenous spirituality that is much older comes from a time when humanity was given the names, when we were given this magical relationship with creation, and we were the guardians of the names. And we knew how to work with creation, and it knew how to work with us. Just like, certain shamans learned the language of birds, or the language of animals. And it was this mutual relationship with a world that is created magically. And it's one of my deepest prayers that this magic can return. It's now receded. It's like a lot of wisdom, if it's not used or not used properly, it fades away. And when I was working in the inner worlds, they were getting further and further away. They were more and more difficult to reach because our schools don't teach that anymore. It's as simple as that. There used to be schools where they were taught that. There used to be schools where that wisdom, that understanding of this magical relationship to life was what you went to school to learn. Why would you want to learn anything else except how to be in this world as you should be? And so the shamans taught the apprentices, and they learned. They learned the songs, they learned the sacred words that are spoken, they learned the stories. If you're an Aboriginal, you learned the wisdom of the Dreamtime, which is also the time of naming, which is always present. It wasn't some time in the past. Again, they have a very different understanding of time. They don't believe in the past like we do. They believe in the dream time, in the time that is becoming, in the time before time. And their magic is alive, and it's dying. It's one of the hidden reasons why the earth is dying, which of course the politicians, the ecologists can't talk about because they've lost it. And there was a time when the magic was palpable, when you walked in a world of magic, and the relationship with creation was magical. And it is one of if I could have a deepest wish for this world, is that this magic could return, so that maybe the grandchildren of my grandchildren could say, I have heard stories of a time when the magic was not present. That they could say, do you know, Papa? Do you know those stories when people didn't believe in magic? When the natural magic of life wasn't present? And he would say, yes, I have heard stories. And grandfather, like some of us already are, hands in our beard, said, well, I remember what it was like when those colors weren't in the air, when you couldn't hear those songs, when people just believed in a physical world, when the earth was what they called a resource. And people talked about economic progress. But now we have remembered. Now the magic is back. Now the earth is singing again. Now the earth is singing its own song. Do you remember a time when the earth didn't sing? And they would say, of course not, Grandpa. Of course the earth sings. How could the earth not sing? We all have our own song. We are born with our own song. Our parents welcome us into this world with our own song. How could it be otherwise? How could we not hear the song of creation? How could we not hear it? We are part of it. It is our duty to look after it. We are guardians of the spiritual, magical dimension of creation. That is why God gave Adam the names, not so he could rape and pillage and desecrate, not so he could subjugate nature, but so he could sing together with nature. And that is, for me, this real magic. Yes, there are all these other forms of magic, and they are useful, dangerous. To me, they are secondary with the great magic that belongs to life, that belongs to creation, that belong to humanity, in which we have lost. And I do think we can each reclaim it in our own way. As I said, Mrs. Tweedy was a magical person. There were always rainbows, and when she went away, her garden always knew like 3 days before she was coming back. We didn't, but I would go into the garden and suddenly the flowers would be, oh, she's coming back. Suddenly the roses would have a different scent to them. They knew she was coming back. And we can each have that in our own way and reclaim that simple, magical relationship to life and realize that we're part of this living, breathing, spiritual whole we call creation. It's as simple as that. And then magic can start to breathe again in your life, in the life of your home, and something can, like a memory can come back to us. This is how it is meant to be. This is how life is meant to be. Life is meant to be magical. And we are magical. Human beings are magical. We don't have to forget by the time we're 4 or 5. We don't. And then I think there is hope for the earth, because it can't be solved by scientists. Look what the mess they've made. But magic, miracles, yes. Maybe a miracle is needed at this time to make the magic come alive again. Imagine living in a world without magic. How could you? How would you get up in the morning? Oh, just to go to work, pedal on your bicycle, get in your car. Oh. Those are our stories, those are our dreams, those are that soft touch of the other world that comes to meet us when we're not looking. Those are